Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask me a question that I thought was interesting. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And yes, I know this shirt's a little tight today. Must be making gains. I must be benefiting from the 3-lift rule, because technically my training is basically the 3-lift rule. That's actually all I do these days. I do 3 big heavy lifts every day, 6 days a week. That's how I train. That is how I train. But he asked the question of how come no one talks about the 3-lift rule anymore? People talked about it for years. I grew up on that. And I had to do Googling, and you can't even find information on it. That's how the old school guys used to train. That was one of their rules in the gym. And now that he mentions it, I remember that. In fact, even programs like Strong Lifts are kind of based upon that concept. And the 3-lift rule, meaning before you do anything else in the gym, you've got to do 3 big barbell movements. Notice I said barbell. Now, I go so far as to say you can include weighted bodyweight movements also, because that's pretty similar in a lot of ways. So you got to remember, a lot of barbell movements are just weighted bodyweight movements, right? That's what a lot of them are. Barbell squat, a squat is a movement on itself. It's a normal movement pattern. That's an exercise even without weights. So that's a perfect example. Perfect example. So a lot of your big barbell movements are big weighted bodyweight movements. But their whole point was that before you do anything else, you do 3 barbell movements. In other words, you do the lifts that you're going to get the most mileage out of. You're going to get the most bang for your buck. Then, if you have anything left, and you just want to get a little more fatigue in whatever areas, that's when you mess with your isolation movements, your dumbbells, your machines, your cables. And the problem is that you see a lot of guys, they go in and that's all they do. And then they honestly think they're doing a big heavy compound because maybe they're doing a machine. They'll do a row machine or a lat pull down or a leg press, and they're counting that as a big exercise. In reality, it's really not. You don't recruit the same number of muscles throughout the body on any of those that you do with their bigger counterparts. For example, a leg press doesn't compete with a squat, back squat, or a front squat in terms of overall development. It can't. Doesn't compete with a deadlift either. Even a hack squat machine doesn't compete with them. Less muscles involved. Right? Less muscles involved. Machine row, that doesn't compete with a barbell row. Barbell row works more muscles. Weighted chin up or a barbell row works more muscles than a lat pull down. You guys see where I'm going with all of this? In other words, you get in and you do the real work. Do the real work. And yeah, that is how it was often done back in the day. And these guys were big and strong before they had access to all these drugs. Before they had access to all the drugs. Different era. They didn't use what guys use today. There's guys today who claim natural. Plenty of guys, thousands of guys who claim natural, who use way more stuff than the enhanced guys used back in the 50s and 60s. So you need some perspective there. Those guys they used very, very, very conservatively by modern standards, to the point where if you ask the average guy today who uses anything, they would be like, that's a waste of time. You would make any gains using what they used. I've literally heard that said when you bring up guys who just got into that game in the last decade. You talk to them about what guys used back then, or you don't mention what they use, just stuff that you know they used to talk about, because it's all available, because stuff wasn't illegal back then. And if you were to mention their ideas of what they took, they'd be like, oh, that's a waste of time. It's a waste of time. I wouldn't even bridge with that. So perspective there. But it worked. These guys got results because they did real training. They did hard training. So what do I mean? Well, you don't necessarily have to make things full body, but I recommend for a lot of guys looking at it that way, unless you wanted to do an upper-lower type split. But big movements first, meaning you can squat, bench, and deadlift before you do anything else. Now, obviously, that's a little more powerlifting oriented. But a better example, let's say you were doing some sort of push-pull or an upper-lower. Well, that could mean if you were doing a push, you could come in, you could back squat or front squat, bench press, do weighted dips. or a strict standing press, right? It's all pushing exercises. Whole day, you get deadlift, barbell row, and do weighted chin-ups, right? You do that before you consider anything else in the day, and that's perfect examples. Now, you could take a system like what I use, the modified Bulgarian type training that I'm doing right now, and I hit a heavy 1 to 3 rep training max on 3 lifts. I do some sort of squat, some sort of push, some sort of pull. Right? So, for example, if it's my deadlift day, because I only deadlift once a week, I do a pause squat, I do a standing press, and then I do the deadlift. So basically, a day like that for me is what they do in a strength lifting meet, right? Because I do a squat, I do a strict press, and then I do a conventional deadlift. Another day, I might come in, squat, floor press, Pendlay row, squat, strict press, weighted chin-ups. Kind of seeing a pattern here? So that's how I train these days. So I incorporate what's interesting to me. The person brought up the 3 lift rule, and it never occurred to me when I started training this way again that technically what I'm doing follows a 3 lift rule. I'm following the 3 lift rule, other than that's what I do. And that's the thing you've got to remember. A lot of people have made a lot of progress training with that sort of system. Whether it's a structured program system or not, it worked, because you can't not gain muscle training that way, because you're coming in and using basic progressive overload on 3 big exercises every time you walk in the gym. It doesn't matter whether it's a 3-day-a-week program, a 4-day-a-week program, sort of modified Bulgarian 6-day-a-week program, but the concept is the same. Big, heavy movements put the most muscle and the most strength on you. And that's not even subject to debate. Any evidence to the contrary pretty much doesn't exist. Doesn't exist, and that's what people need to remember. When you start looking at all these other things, there hasn't been a single study yet produced, to my knowledge, where a barbell curl, I mean even a concentration curl or a machine curl, produced more bicep growth than a lat pull down has. Let that sink in. There's never been a study yet where, when people were compared side by side, where someone gained more muscle in their triceps from doing a tricep extension instead of a bench press. Compound movements build everything. And you need to understand that everything else that you do is secondary. And this whole idea of doing a large amounts of machine and isolation work is a very modern concept coming from a different era. And it's coming from an era when people use a hell of a lot more drugs to reach their goals than just having to do hard training. And that does matter. Because if people don't understand, step back and go back and look at the guys from that other era. Look at the guys from the 50s and 60s and think about the fact that they did not even have access to the drugs that people have access to today. Think about the guys that you know at your gym, because you need to keep in mind, whether it was strongman or powerlifting type stuff or bodybuilding or whatever back in that era, not that many people did it. They didn't have a massive gene pool to draw from. Like people seem to think, like today more people train, so you see more exceptional examples. Those were, a lot of them were just average guys who just got into training and working out. A lot of them got really phenomenal results. Look at their overall size. Well, look at their overall strength. All right, look at their overall strength. And then put in perspective. Those guys didn't have access to all these drugs. They didn't have access to it. Yet, if you were to take a lot of them today, they would be accused of being a fake natty. A whole lot of them would. Just food for thought. And that's kind of the whole point, is that people have gotten away from more effective training because they really and truly believe that this lazier styles of training is going to produce better results. And the reality is it's just not. It simply doesn't stimulate as much growth as just doing the basics themselves will. And I'm not telling people that there's anything wrong with doing some curls or lateral raises or whatever, because those guys, a lot of them still did those things too. Did they not? But the point is They did the real work first, and then they did the other stuff for finishing touches. It's basically assistance types exercises. They understood that those secondary movements were not the primary stimulators for growth. They were just there to kind of finish a muscle off, right? They were kind of like just the icing on the cake. And that the other exercises were where the real work was done. The big barbell movements. Squats, deadlifts, bench presses, clean and presses, overhead presses, rows, weighted chin-ups, weighted dips. The big movements. Real exercises. That was the meat and potatoes of their training. And that all the other stuff was, again, kind of like just dessert. Wasn't the meal. Wasn't where you got your gains. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.